My name is Alara and I died on a Tuesday. The memories of that life, my first life, are not gentle ghosts. They are sharp, jagged shards of glass embedded in my soul. I remember the cold of the hospital room, the metallic scent of blood, and the crushing weight of betrayal that was far more effective than any anesthetic. My husband, Alistair, and his so-called devoted cousin, Serafina, had built their happiness on the foundation of my grave. For 15 years I lived in a gilded cage. Serafina had woven herself into the fabric of our lives using a single powerful thread, a debt of gratitude. The story was that Alistair had been drugged at a corporate event, and Serafina, in a selfless act of sacrifice, had saved him by offering her own body to break the drug's fever. From that night on, she was the perpetual savior, the saint who could do no wrong. She drank from my favorite jade teacup, the one my grandmother had given me. She would parade around our home in Alistair's crisp white dress shirts, her legs long and pale beneath the hem. And Alistair, he reveled in it. He would whisper to me, "Alara, my heart is only yours," while his eyes followed Serafina around the room. He held me captive with promises and threats, using the hope of a child, the baby growing in my womb, as a chain to bind me to him. "We are a family," he'd say, his voice a silken threat. "You will not destroy this." He got his wish. I didn't destroy the family. I simply ceased to be part of it, dying on the birthing table as Serafina, in another room, delivered a healthy son. The last thing I heard was my mother-in-law, Eleanor, whispering that they should focus on the healthy child, meaning Serafina's boy. My own child, my daughter, died with me. And then I woke up. The disorientation was a physical blow. The silk sheets against my skin, the faint scent of Alistair's cologne on the pillow next to me, the hum of the mansion's climate control, it was all terrifyingly familiar. I stumbled out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, and found myself drawn to the source of muffled sounds from the guest wing. I pushed the door open just a crack, and there was the scene from my nightmares playing out in real time. Alistair, his face flushed and dazed, lay on the rumpled bedsheets. And on top of him, moving with a shameless, calculated rhythm, was Serafina. A coldness, profound and absolute, washed over me. The panic, the heartbreak, the raw fury of my first life, they did not come. Instead, a crystalline clarity descended. This was my ground zero. This was where I could rewrite the story. In my first life I had thrown the door open, screamed, cried, and played the jealous wife. It was that hysteria that had allowed Serafina to paint herself as the calm, self-sacrificing victim and me as the ungrateful shrew. Not this time. Calmly, silently I closed the door. I leaned against the cool wood for a single moment, my mind racing, plotting trajectories. Then I moved. I didn't call the police. I called the family. I went down the list, my voice a perfectly modulated instrument of concerned wife. I called Alistair's uncle, Benedict, interrupting his high-stakes poker game. I called his aunt, Cordelia, rousing her from her late-night reading. I even called his stern traditionalist father, Arthur, and his perpetually anxious mother, Eleanor. I was vague but insistent, my words laced with a feigned, bewildered worry. "It's Alistair," I'd said. "There's been an incident. Serafina is with him. She says she's helping him, but I think you all should be here as witnesses." Within 20 minutes, the grand foyer of our home was filled with the disgruntled, sleep-deprived elders of the prestigious Sterling family. Benedict's face was already flushed with irritation and whiskey. "Alara, what is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the marbled space. "Dragging us here in the dead of night for some domestic drama?" I stood before them, the picture of wifely distress, my hands clasped demurely in front of me. I lowered my eyes, my voice a soft but clear murmur that cut through their grumbling. "Uncle Benedict, I apologize for the disruption. But I'm not creating drama. Alistair was compromised tonight. Drugged, I believe. And Serafina, she's in there with him now. She insisted that she was the only one who could save him. She said it was a matter of great urgency, a great kindness that shouldn't be hidden. So I thought it best that the family, his pillars of strength, be here to witness this kindness." As if on cue, a low, throaty moan, unmistakably Serafina's, filtered through the heavy bedroom door, followed by Alistair's groggy, incoherent mumbling. The air in the foyer solidified. Eleanor's face went from pale to a sickly green. Her hand trembled as she pointed a finger at me. You She wanted to call me a troublemaker, but the sound from the room was too damning. I met her gaze, my own wide and innocent. Mother, Alistair was drugged. Serafina said only she could help him. She said it was a debt that could never be repaid. So I brought you all here to ensure that debt is properly acknowledged. That was all the prompting Benedict needed. With a roar of fury, he lunged forward and kicked the bedroom door open. The lock splintered, and the door swung inward to reveal the scene in all its sordid glory. Alistair was half-conscious, his clothes in disarray. And Serafina, caught in the act, whipped her head around, her face a perfect mask of frozen shock before it crumpled into a performance of terror. She snatched the duvet to cover herself, and her tears began to fall with practiced ease. No. It's not what you think, she wailed, her voice a masterpiece of feigned despair. Eleanor moved like a striking snake, her hand connecting with Serafina's cheek in a sharp crack. You vile creature, she shrieked. He's like a brother to you. How could you? Serafina clutched her reddening cheek, sobbing even harder. Aunt Eleanor, I had to. He was given a powerful drug. The doctor said if the fever wasn't broken it could damage his mind. I had no choice. I couldn't just let him suffer. Her words were a desperate, heartfelt plea, designed to appeal to a mother's fear. And I saw it work. Eleanor's anger faltered. She looked at her son, his face flushed and his eyes glazed, and her expression shifted to one of distress and fear. Alistair's father, Arthur, stood silently, his face like thunder, but he said nothing. He was a man who valued reputation above all, and this was a stain of the worst kind. I watched them, this familiar dance of manipulation and guilt, and I felt a cold smile touch my heart. This was where their narrative had taken root in my past life. But this time I held the pen. As Alistair began to stir, confusion and fear dawning on his face, and as Eleanor started her hushed, sympathetic explanation to him, I took a step forward. I began to clap. Slow, measured, mocking applause that shattered the tense, faux heartwarming atmosphere. If this was truly a life-saving act, I said, my voice cutting through the room like shards of ice, then it cannot be brushed away with simple thanks. All eyes turned to me. I walked up to Alistair, who was now sitting up, looking utterly lost. Husband, I said, my tone sweet yet laced with venom. Serafina has sacrificed her virtue for you. Such a monumental debt must be immortalized. I will commission a plaque first thing in the morning, a deed of merit, detailing her heroic sacrifice. We'll hang it right there in the center of the main living room wall, so every guest who enters our home will know of the great Serafina's nobility. The silence that followed was deafening, absolute. It was the sound of their carefully constructed world cracking apart. They wanted a private, unspoken bond, a reason for Alistair and Serafina's endless, murky entanglement. I was offering them a public monument to their shame. This was only the beginning. The deadly silence in the room was more satisfying than any scream I could have uttered. Eleanor's face had frozen in a rictus of horror. Arthur's jaw was so tight I feared he might crack a tooth. But the most priceless expressions were those of Alistair and Serafina. They stared at me wide-eyed and utterly dumbstruck, like children who had been caught stealing candy and were now being forced to eat the entire jar in one sitting. Elara, what blasphemy are you speaking? Eleanor was the first to find her voice, though it was shrill and strained. This is a private, shameful matter. We do not erect plaques for such indiscretions. I widened my eyes, feigning innocent confusion. Mother, how can you call it shameful? Serafina selflessly saved your son from potential brain damage. That is an act of heroism greater than those in the old epics. If the Sterling family does not show proper recognition, won't the world call us ungrateful? I turned my gaze to the red-faced Benedict. Uncle, you are a pillar of this family. Don't you agree we must honor such a profound debt? Benedict looked like a bull caught in a trap. He knew it was a disgrace, but by framing it as a matter of family honor and gratitude, I had backed him into a corner. To disagree would be to admit the Sterlings were cheapskates who didn't repay their saviors. He could only grumble, this is not the time or place for such discussions. Serafina, seeing her carefully orchestrated victim narrative being twisted into a public joke, scrambled to regain control. She pulled away from Eleanor's half-hearted embrace, her tear-filled eyes locking onto mine with a practiced plea. Elara, please, you mustn't, she whispered, her voice trembling. I ask for no repayment. I only did what any devoted friend would do. I couldn't stand by and watch Alistair come to harm. I stepped forward and gently took her hand, my touch light but firm. She flinched. How can we ignore it, Serafina? The Sterling family is not without honor. Don't you worry. I will remember your kindness for the rest of my life, and so will the entire family. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the assembled Sterlings, my expression one of serene resolve. In fact, to ensure we repay this debt more fully, I have decided to invite Serafina to move in with us permanently. From this day forward she will be my blood sister. I will take care of her wholeheartedly, ensuring she never suffers the slightest grievance in this house. The reaction was instantaneous. Even Benedict shot to his feet. Preposterous. Alistair finally found his voice, lurching off the bed and grabbing my wrist. His grip was tight, desperate. Elara, have you lost your mind? I looked at his hand on my arm, then up into his panicked eyes. My own gaze held nothing but a chilling calm. In my first life this exact scenario had played out, but the roles were reversed. They had pressured me to accept her moving in, using the debt of gratitude as a cudgel to beat down my objections. I had swallowed my tears and my pride and agreed, sealing my own misery. This time I was the one issuing the invitation. I was the one wielding the weapon of their own making. I wanted them to understand the meaning of the old saying, "It is easy to invite a spirit but difficult to send it away." With my so-called goodwill and righteousness the matter was settled. No one could openly object without looking like they were shirking their moral duty. Eleanor looked at me with deep suspicion and displeasure. Alistair spent the next few days in a sullen, gloomy silence, the illusion of his control shattered. On the very first day Serafina moved her things into the luxurious guest suite, the one adjacent to our master bedroom. She began her old games. She emerged from her room wearing one of Alistair's favorite white dress shirts. The oversized garment skimmed her thighs, showcasing her long, pale legs as she paraded back and forth in the living room, a silent declaration of war. In my past life, this very act had sent me into a spiral of rage and insecurity. I had confronted Alistair, only to be met with dismissive annoyance. "It's just a shirt, Elara. Is it worth this hysterical scene? She saved my life, for God's sake." This time I did not get angry. I observed her for a moment, then smiled, a genuine, amused smile that seemed to unnerve her. "Serafina," I said, my voice warm. "You look lovely in that shirt. The color suits you." She froze mid-stride, her eyes flickering with confusion before being replaced by a glint of triumph. She thought I had capitulated. She thought I was finally accepting her dominance. The next day I called a tailor to the house. I had him meet us in the grand sitting room. In front of Serafina, I had the tailor take Alistair's measurements for 20 new identical white dress shirts. Then I turned to her, my smile still in place. "Now, Serafina, what is your favorite color? We shall have 20 shirts made for you as well. From now on you and Alistair can wear matching outfits every day. A testament to your special bond." Her face drained of all color instantly. The very act she used to mark her territory, I was now mass-producing, stripping it of all its illicit power and turning it into a uniform for her role as the grateful guest. The servants, who had been whispering among themselves, now looked at her with unveiled disdain. Her attempt at seduction had been reframed as a childish need for matching clothes. Humiliated, she fled to her room and didn't emerge for the rest of the day. Later, Eleanor came to find me in the conservatory, where I was calmly trimming the stems of white lilies. "Elara, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her face a mask of displeasure. "Serafina is this family's benefactor. How can you oppress her so?" I didn't look up from my flowers. "Mother, I wasn't oppressing her. I was repaying her kindness. She has a fondness for Alistair's shirts, so I'm ensuring she has an ample supply of her own. Is that not reasonable? Or must I literally give her the clothes off my own back for it to count as gratitude?" Eleanor was left speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I set the scissors down with a soft click and stepped closer to her. "Don't worry, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I will never forget Serafina's kindness. From now on, the best of everything in this house will be given to her first. The finest food, the most exquisite jewels. Alistair was saved by her. She is our family's saint. We must worship her properly." I held her gaze, the smile never leaving my face. Eleanor stared at me, and for a reason she couldn't quite articulate, a shiver ran down her spine. She left the room without another word, unnerved by the perfect, placid weapon I had become. The balance of power in the Sterling mansion had shifted. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of their discomfort, and I was only just getting started. The tension in the Sterling house became a thick, palpable fog. Serafina, now officially installed as the honored guest, perfected her role as the fragile, suffering saint. She moved through the halls with a delicate air, a hand often pressed to her temple, sighing as if carrying the weight of the world. Alistair's guilt, which had once been a comfortable tool for his own enjoyment, now became a relentless burden. My relentless gratitude was a spotlight he couldn't escape. He finally cornered me in his study one evening, a room that still smelled of his expensive cigars and old leather, scents I had once found comforting. Now they just smelled of deceit. "Elara, what is it that you truly want?" he asked, his voice heavy with a fatigue that went beyond the physical. He looked worn down, the charming facade cracking to reveal the weak man beneath. I looked up from the book I was pretending to read, feigning surprise. "Want? I don't want anything, Alistair. I have everything a wife could ask for." I gestured vaguely around the opulent room. A beautiful home, a successful husband, and now a dear sister to share my life with. He drew in a deep, frustrated breath, trying to adopt the reasonable tone he'd always used to manipulate me. "I know you're upset. What man wouldn't be? But what's done is done. Serafina, she is an innocent in this. Could you find it in your heart to stop targeting her? After all," he said, his voice dropping to that familiar, significant note, "she did save my life." There was the mantra of my first life. The phrase that had kept me compliant for 15 years. It no longer had any power over me. Instead, it ignited a cold fire in my veins. I closed the book with a soft thud and met his gaze squarely. "Alistair, which part of my actions looks like targeting her? I ensure she is fed the most exquisite meals, dressed in the finest silks. Even your mother remarks on how well I am caring for her. And now you accuse me? Or is the problem that you believe I am treating her too well? That your savior is somehow unworthy of such lavish repayment?" His expression stiffened. My words had struck the core of his hypocrisy. He wanted Serafina nearby to assuage his own guilt and feed his ego, but he needed me to be the silent, suffering wife to maintain the respectable facade. My open-armed, very public gratitude shattered that balance. I was placing Serafina on a pedestal so high it was isolating, crowning her with a title so heavy it was suffocating them both. Just then, as if summoned by the tension, Serafina glided into the study. She was a vision of calculated purity in a spotless white lace dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. In her hands she carried a small tray with a single bowl of steaming soup. "Alistair? Elara," she said, her voice a timid whisper. "I made some black-bone chicken soup. I thought you might need something nourishing." She noticed the charged atmosphere between us and took a hesitant step back, her eyes wide. "Oh, am I interrupting?" Alistair was on his feet in an instant, his demeanor shifting from frustrated husband to concerned protector. He hurried to take the tray from her. "Of course not. You shouldn't be exerting yourself. You need to rest." Serafina shook her head, a pale, fragile swan. "I couldn't sleep. I felt uneasy." Then her gaze slid to me, her eyes instantly rimming with red. "Elara, if you hate me so much, I will pack my things and leave tomorrow. I never wanted to come between you and Alistair. I can't be the reason your marriage falls apart." What a magnificent performance. The self-sacrificing martyr, offering to retreat and thus making herself even more indispensable. I stepped forward smoothly, took the bowl of soup from the tray in Alistair's hands and scooped up a spoonful. I held it out to her lips, my smile benign. "Serafina, what are you saying? You are the esteemed benefactor of this family. Leaving is out of the question. Here you need your strength more than we do. Drink." My hand was steady, the spoon poised right at her mouth. Panic flared in her eyes. This was a checkmate. If she refused, she was rejecting my very public goodwill and revealing her petulance. If she drank, she was accepting her role as the weak, needy invalid who had to be fed like a child. Alistair frowned. "Elara, don't be absurd." I kept my eyes on Serafina. "Absurd? I am personally tending to the woman who saved my husband's life. Is that absurd? Or do you in your heart secretly believe her act was unworthy of such care? I emphasized the word unworthy, and saw Alistair flinch. He could call me cruel or petty, but he could never ever voice that he looked down on Seraphina's sacrifice. To do so would paint him as the ultimate ingrate. He was trapped. Seraphina's body gave a delicate tremble. She looked to Alistair for rescue, but he averted his gaze, defeated by my logic. Under the watchful eyes of both of us, she had no choice. She opened her mouth and allowed me to feed her the spoonful of soup. I smiled with satisfaction. Good girl. I then shoved the bowl back into Alistair's hands. Husband, you feed her the rest. After all, she endured so much for you. This is the least you can do. Alistair stood frozen, the bowl a hot weight in his hands, trapped between his mistress and his wife, a pawn in a game he no longer understood. That night, Seraphina fell violently ill. Vomiting, diarrhea, a fever. The doctor diagnosed acute gastritis. By dawn, Eleanor was storming into my bedroom, her face contorted with fury. Elara, what have you done? She shrieked, jabbing a finger at me. Did you poison that soup? I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and sat up slowly, the picture of calm affront. Mother, you can eat food carelessly, but you cannot speak carelessly. That soup was prepared by Mrs. Davies in the kitchen. Seraphina had some, Alistair had some. Why is she the only one sick? And if I truly wished her harm, would I use such a stupid, blatantly obvious method? Eleanor was momentarily silenced by the cold, hard logic. But she pressed on, unwilling to relinquish her narrative. It's your fault regardless. You must have frightened her. She's delicate, her spirit is easily shaken. She has suffered so much, and you make her life a misery every day. I swung my legs out of bed, poured myself a glass of water and took a slow sip. Mother, that makes even less sense. I treat her like a revered saint. How is that making her life a misery? I set the glass down and stepped closer, my voice dropping. Or do you mean that I should hand my husband over to her, formally, before you will consider that I have treated her well enough? Eleanor's face underwent a rapid series of changes. I had struck a nerve. I stared directly into her eyes, my gaze unwavering. Mother, be honest. Do you feel in your heart that I should relinquish my position as Alistair's wife to Seraphina? She was stunned into silence. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. Of course she wanted Seraphina around. A devoted, pliable daughter-in-law figure who provided a male heir was every traditionalist's dream. But she also couldn't deny the social standing and connections my own family name brought to the Sterlings. To actually replace me with Seraphina was a social suicide she wasn't prepared for. Elara, don't be dramatic, she finally muttered, the fight gone out of her. She turned and left my room, a guilty retreat. In the days that followed, the household dynamic tilted even more absurdly in Seraphina's favor. She became the ultimate fragile heroine, and Alistair's guilt reached its zenith. He was constantly at her side, his attention a balm for her suffering. Eleanor coddled her with bird's nest soup and pearl powder. And I, the ever-dutiful wife, was cast as the villain, cold, ungrateful and cruel. The servants' pitying looks followed me everywhere. But I didn't care. I was playing a long game. I was letting them build the pyre themselves. The higher they lifted her, the more spectacular her fall would be. And I knew exactly how and when to light the match. The opportunity one had been waiting for arrived with a gold-embossed invitation. The Sterling family was hosting its annual autumn gala, a glittering affair meant to showcase our unity and success to the city's most influential business partners and socialites. It was the perfect stage. The day of the banquet, Eleanor summoned me to her private parlor. She was already dressed in a severe dark gown, her jewels looking less like adornments and more like armor. Elara, she began, her tone that of a general giving orders before a battle. Tonight, every guest is vital to the Sterling interests. You are the lady of this house. I expect you to mind your composure. Watch your words and behavior carefully. She paused, her eyes boring into me. Especially regarding Seraphina. Not a single word about her. Is that understood? I nodded, my face a placid mask. Of course, Mother. Her critical gaze swept over my simple navy blue sheath dress. And go change into something more suitable. That color is far too somber. You look like you're attending a funeral. She then added, almost as an afterthought, "And ensure Serafina remains in her quarters. Her constitution is fragile. We can't have her catching a chill in the drafty halls." I merely smiled and returned to my room. I had no intention of wearing somber colors or hiding Serafina away. Quite the opposite. When the first guests began to arrive, the grand ballroom was a spectacle of crystal and light. I made my entrance and a hushed whisper rippled through the crowd. I wore a gown of blazing crimson, a color I had never dared to wear in my first life. A color of passion, of warning, of power. It clung to my frame, and with my hair swept up to expose my neck, I felt like a warrior queen walking into her final battle. I took my place beside Alistair at the entrance to the ballroom. He stiffened as I approached, his eyes widening at my attire. "What is the meaning of this, Ilara?" he hissed under his breath, forcing a smile for a passing investor. "Why are you dressed like that?" I tilted my head, allowing a slow, deliberate smile to touch my lips. "Like what, my dear husband? Am I not beautiful?" Under the brilliant chandeliers, my skin seemed to glow against the red silk, my eyes sharp and clear. He swallowed hard, his gaze momentarily trapped. "No, you are very beautiful," he conceded, his voice tight before he quickly looked away unnerved. The evening progressed, a whirl of false laughter and hollow conversation. The air was thick with the unspoken knowledge of the Sterling family's scandal, though no one dared mention it aloud. They all watched me, the wronged wife, with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Midway through the evening, as the string quartet began a new piece, I saw my moment. I picked up a crystal champagne flute and lightly tapped it with a fork. The clear, ringing sound cut through the murmur of the crowd. Every face turned toward me. Alistair and Eleanor, who had been schmoozing near the head table, froze, their smiles dissolving into masks of panic. "Distinguished guests, dear friends," I began, my voice carrying easily across the vast room without a hint of tremor. "Thank you all for gracing our home with your presence tonight." I paused, letting the silence build. "There is someone very special I would like to introduce to you all. A great benefactor to the Sterling family." As my words hung in the air, the large double doors at the side of the ballroom slowly opened. There, supported by two maids as if she might break, stood Serafina. I had instructed the staff to dress her in a white silk gown, making her look even more like a sacrificial virgin. Her face was a portrait of shock and confusion. She had clearly been told she was being brought down for a private family toast, not this public spectacle. I smiled, a brilliant public relations smile. "This is Miss Serafina Vale. Not long ago my beloved husband Alistair was the victim of a cruel poisoning." A collective gasp went through the room. In that moment of dire need, Miss Vale, disregarding her own virtue and safety, sacrificed herself to save his life. The Sterling family will be forever in her debt. I could feel the heat of Alistair's horrified gaze on me. I saw Eleanor's hand fly to her chest. Their faces were a study in ashen fury. I continued, my voice dropping to a more intimate, heartfelt tone. "Her selfless act has moved me deeply. It has shown me the true meaning of sacrifice." I looked out at the sea of captivated, scandalized faces. "And so, tonight, in front of all of you, our most respected friends and peers, I wish to make an announcement." I took a deep, dramatic breath. "I have decided to divorce Alistair Sterling." The silence that fell was absolute, so profound you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. "I will willingly relinquish all claims to our joint assets and leave with nothing but the clothes on my back," I declared, my voice ringing with conviction. "All to fulfill the profound bond that exists between Alistair and his savior, Miss Serafina Vale. I hope all of you here today will bear witness to this, and to their future union." For a full 3 seconds there was no sound. Then the ballroom erupted in a cacophony of shocked exclamations and frantic whispers. I had taken the family's dirty secret and, with the precision of a surgeon, laid it bare on the operating table for all to see. Harold Sterling, Alistair's father, began to tremble, pointing a shaking finger at me before choking on his fury and stumbling back, requiring support. Eleanor let out a shrill cry and rushed to his side. Alistair was on the dais in seconds, his face a mask of pure rage. He seized my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. "Ilara, have you lost your mind? What are you saying?" he snarled, his eyes wild. I looked at him, my expression one of serene calm amidst the storm I had created. I am speaking the truth, Alistair. Serafina sacrificed everything for you. Don't you think you should marry her? Or do you intend to let her live her entire life as a secret mistress, a woman with no status forever in the shadows? I leaned slightly towards the microphone, and my final words to him echoed through the stunned room. Alistair, that would be truly selfish. The dam of gossip broke completely. Is it true? He always seemed so proper. That's the woman he calls his cousin? How sordid. His poor wife, she's giving up everything. Each whispered judgment was a lash against the Sterling family's crumbling facade. Their complexions shifted through shades of purple, green, and gray. Serafina stood as white as her dress, looking as if she might genuinely faint. This was not what she wanted. She wanted to be the secret power, the beloved shadow, not the publicly acknowledged homewrecker. Alistair, furious and humiliated, tried to drag me off the stage. I wrenched my arm from his grasp with a strength that surprised us both. Alistair. I projected my voice, no longer needing the microphone. Do you dare to stand here in front of everyone and say that you do not wish to marry Serafina? He froze. He didn't dare. If he said it, he would be branded the ungrateful scoundrel who used a woman and threw her away. I then turned my gaze to the trembling Serafina. And you, Serafina? Do you dare to stand here and tell all these people that you do not wish to marry Alistair? She too was trapped. If she spoke, her entire narrative of selfless, heart-driven sacrifice would be exposed as a calculated farce. Their silence was a louder confession than any words could ever be. I reached into the small clutch I carried and pulled out the divorce papers I had had my lawyer draw up weeks before. I slammed them down on the velvet-covered table next to the podium. Then sign them, Alistair, I said, my voice cold and final. The Sterling family's grand gala had become the most spectacular social demolition in a decade. And as I stood there watching my gilded cage collapse into rubble around its inhabitants, I took my first full breath of free air. The fallout from the banquet was a wildfire that consumed the Sterling family's reputation. The story was too salacious not to spread. The powerful CEO, his scheming cousin, and the noble wife who sacrificed everything. 4 days the press camped outside the Sterling mansion, their cameras flashing like malevolent lightning. The family's stock plummeted, a direct reflection of their plummeting social standing. I moved out the very next day, leasing a sleek, modern apartment in a building known for its discretion. It was sparse and quiet, filled with nothing but light and my own choices. The silence was a balm. Alistair came to see me a week later. He looked haggard, a ghost of the polished man I had once loved. His suit was rumpled, a dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and the aura of invincible charm had completely evaporated. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice rough. I stepped aside, letting him in. He stood awkwardly in the minimalist living room, finally sinking onto my white sofa. He lit a cigarette without asking, his hands trembling slightly. He smoked in silence for a long time, the smoke curling in the afternoon light like the ghost of our old life. "Why, Ilara?" he finally rasped, crushing the cigarette. "Why did you have to do that? Why destroy everything in such a public spectacle?" I poured myself a glass of mineral water, the crystals clinking softly against the glass. "To make the two of you whole," I said lightly, as if stating the obvious. "It's what you both wanted, wasn't it? A life together." I simply removed the obstacle. "Me." He lifted his head, his gaze a complicated storm of anger, guilt, and a desperate, lingering possessiveness. "Ilara, you know that's not true. You know in my heart the woman I love isn't her." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "It's only ever been you." I laughed then, a sharp, brittle sound that made him flinch. In my past life, those same words had been a chain, binding me to him while he enjoyed the best of both worlds. Now they were just empty, filthy syllables. "Don't," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the air between us. "Don't you dare talk to me about love. The only thing I want to know is when you plan to marry Serafina. Don't drag it out. A woman's reputation is a fragile thing, or so I'm told." His face crumpled. "I will never marry her," he whispered, burying his face in his hands. "The only wife I will ever have is you." I arched a brow, the picture of cold amusement. "Is that so? And what of Serafina, the great life-saving benefactor of the Sterling family? Do you intend to use her and cast her aside?" I stood and walked over to him, looking down at his bowed head. Alistair, don't be such a beast. The insult landed like a physical blow. He looked up, his face chalk-white under my scorn. He had no rebuttal. He had built this cage himself. You started this game, I said, my voice low and precise. But how it ends? That's up to me now. You have two choices. You marry Serafina in a grand public wedding that finally makes an honest woman of her, and I step away cleanly and finally. Or... I leaned down, my lips close to his ear, my whisper a venomous promise. Or you can wait and watch your reputation, your career, and everything your family has built crumble to absolute ashes. He leapt to his feet, his eyes blazing with a shocked, furious disbelief. You want to destroy me? I laughed softly, straightening up. I'm not destroying you, Alistair. You and Serafina are doing a fine job of that yourselves. In the end, he didn't marry her. The Sterling family, reeling from the financial and social blow, decided on a different tactic. They offered Serafina a large sum of money, a quiet, hefty payoff intended to buy her silence and her disappearance. But Serafina had never wanted money. She wanted the title of Mrs. Sterling. She wanted Alistair. The payoff was an insult. She began to unravel in a way I had never seen in my first life. Without me there as the stable, suffering wife to play against, her manipulations had no contrast. She became shrill, desperate. She staged scenes at the mansion, screaming fits, tearful accusations of ingratitude, even a half-hearted suicide attempt with sleeping pills that resulted in nothing more than a forced stomach pumping. She was a performer without an audience, her acts growing more and more unhinged. The gratitude the Sterlings had once felt for her was scraped away, replaced by a weary, bone-deep resentment. Alistair began to avoid the house altogether, staying at his club, seeing her as the source of all his troubles. Eleanor, who had once coddled her, was worn to a nub by the constant drama. Then the bomb dropped. Serafina, realizing her old methods were failing, played her ultimate card. One evening, she lay in wait for Alistair's car at the estate's main gate. When he tried to drive past, she threw herself in front of the vehicle. As his horrified driver slammed on the brakes, she pressed herself against his window and delivered her line with theatrical perfection. I'm pregnant, Alistair. It's your child. The news detonated within the Sterling family. An heir. It was the one thing that could cut through the scandal and the resentment. Eleanor's attitude transformed overnight. The fragile, troublesome woman was suddenly the vessel for the future of the Sterling bloodline. She was personally escorted back into the house, installed in the best guest room, and doted upon as if she were royalty. Harold's face remained a thundercloud, but he said nothing. The family needed an heir. Emboldened by this sudden reversal of fortune, Eleanor called me. Her tone was a nauseating mix of smug condescension and feigned magnanimity. Alara, I suppose you've heard. Serafina is pregnant. It's Alistair's child. He paused, letting the words hang. You've been married for years and your womb has never quickened. Now the Sterling family finally has a successor on the way. So you can be at ease. Another pause, dripping with false benevolence. If you are sensible, you will return. When the child is born, it can be registered under your name. You would still be the mistress of this house. But if you refuse, well, Alistair will have no choice but to sign the divorce papers. Listening to her, a bitter, cold irony washed over me. The echoes of my past life were deafening. On the birthing table, as my life bled out of me, Eleanor had leaned in and whispered, Serafina is pregnant too. The doctor says it's a boy. If your baby is a girl, don't bother fighting, Alara. Save your strength. They had let me die. Now they were offering me the chance to raise my husband's bastard as my own. I answered her with a lightness that clearly confused her. Of course I'll come back, Mother. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I am, after all, the Sterling family's eldest daughter-in-law, I continued smoothly. How could I not return to see the family's precious heir? I'll be there shortly. When I returned to the mansion, it felt like walking onto a stage for the final act. The air was thick with triumphant tension. In the main drawing room, Serafina held court from the largest velvet chaise lounge, surrounded by Eleanor and a flurry of servants fetching her pillows and drinks. She was basking in her victory, her hand resting possessively on her still flat stomach. When she saw me, her eyes gleamed with unadulterated triumph. You've lost, her entire posture screamed. I ignored her completely. I walked straight to Alistair, who stood by the fireplace, looking more haggard and trapped than ever. The dark circles under his eyes were like bruises. "Ilara," he began, his voice strained. I didn't let him finish. I handed him a slim manila folder. "What's this?" he rasped. "The first part is a transcript," I said evenly, my voice carrying in the suddenly quiet room. "From a digital audio recording. The second part is a formal request for a prenatal paternity test." Alistair's face went slack with shock. Serafina shot up from her chaise, all pretense of fragility gone, her body tense as a bowstring. I held up a small, sleek digital recorder. "Remember that night, Alistair? The night all of this began?" I asked, my gaze sweeping over him, then Serafina, then the horrified faces of his parents. It's a funny thing. I've always kept a voice-activated recorder in that particular bedroom drawer. A habit from my design work, to capture ideas in the night. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. I never imagined it would capture something far more illuminating. And I pressed play. The recorder in my hand seemed to suck all the sound from the room before releasing it in a damning flood. First, a man's voice, low and unfamiliar, laced with a vile urgency. "Hurry. Make him finish the drink. Is the dose strong enough?" Then Serafina's voice, cold and utterly calm, a stark contrast to the weeping victim she always played. "Don't worry. It's potent enough to bring down a horse. Once it takes effect, I'll play my part. You'll make sure Ilara and the others see it." The man's sneering laugh sent a chill through the room. "Of course. I'll handle my part. I'll even get some footage. Leverage for later. You're a clever one, Serafina. When you're the new Mrs. Sterling, don't forget your old friend." The recording continued, detailing their entire sordid plot, but the damage was already done. The truth in their own voices was undeniable. Alistair's complexion drained of all color, passing from pale to a sickly gray. His whole body began to tremble and he stumbled back, collapsing against the mantelpiece as if all the bones in his legs had dissolved. He stared at Serafina, his eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it was almost terrifying. "You," he breathed, the word of venomous accusation. "You did this. You plotted this. You ruined me." Across the room, Eleanor and Harold were frozen statues. The woman they had treasured, the savior they had welcomed, the mother of their supposed heir. She was a venomous schemer who had calculated every step of their downfall. Serafina's face was a mask of bloodless horror. With a shriek that was entirely genuine, she launched herself across the room, clawing for the recorder in my hand. "It's a fake. A forgery. Ilara, you vile witch, you fabricated this to frame me." I sidestepped her easily, tucking the recorder safely back into my pocket. Then I picked up the paternity test request from where Alistair had let it fall and slapped it down on the coffee table with a crack. "Fake or not," I said, my voice ice cold, "do you dare to take this test, Serafina? Is the child in your womb Alistair's? Or does it belong to the man whose voice we just heard?" The layers of their deceit were being peeled back one by one, each revelation more shocking than the last. Serafina collapsed onto the Persian rug, not with her usual theatrical grace, but in a boneless heap of utter defeat. The wail that escaped her was raw, maddened. There was no performance left in it. Between sobs that racked her entire body, she confessed. It all spilled out, a confession more damning than I had even imagined. The man was a mid-level executive from a rival corporation. The plan had been to gain a powerful hold over Alistair, not just for Serafina's social climbing, but to slowly bleed Sterling Enterprises of its trade secrets. The drugging had been a setup from start to finish. And the child, the precious heir, was not Alistair's at all. It was her lover's. She had intended to use the baby as her ultimate stepping stone, the final unassailable key to the Sterling fortune and name. She had never dreamed I held this final, devastating trump card. "Why?" Alistair's voice was a broken roar. He lunged for her, his hands going for her throat. "I treated you like a sister. I gave you everything. Why?" It took 3 servants and a horrified Benedict to drag him off her as she gasped and choked on the floor. Harold clutched his chest, his breathing a ragged, alarming sound. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at the sobbing heap that was Serafina, his face purple with rage. "Call the police," he finally managed to choke out before slumping into a chair. "Now." The aftermath was a whirlwind of blue uniforms and stark, official questions. Serafina and her accomplice were eventually taken away, charged with fraud, conspiracy, and intentional administration of a noxious substance. The Sterling family, once the jewel of high society, was now its most pitted and mocked laughingstock. Alistair locked himself in his study for 3 days and 3 nights. The house fell into a funereal silence. When he finally emerged, he was a hollow man, so thin and gaunt he was barely recognizable. He found me in the garden where I was waiting to collect the last of my personal effects. He didn't speak. He simply knelt on the gravel path in front of me. In his hand he clutched the divorce papers I had given him at the banquet, now rumpled and tear-stained. He was sobbing great, heaving, ugly sobs that made him look like a lost child. "Elara, I was wrong," he wept, tears and mucus streaking his face. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. "I was blind. I'm not a man. I don't deserve to live. Please, please give me another chance. Let's start over. I swear on my life I will spend the rest of my days making it up to you. I will never let you shed another tear." I watched him dispassionately. In my first life I had dreamed of this moment 1,000 times. Him on his knees, finally understanding the pain he had caused, begging for forgiveness. But now that it was here I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no love. Just a vast, empty calm, like the stillness after a storm has passed. I gently pulled the divorce agreement from his limp grasp. I took out a pen from my bag. There was no drama, no hesitation. I signed my name on the line with a single, decisive stroke. The sound of the pen on paper was the final period on our story. "Alistair," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "Between us, it is over." I left him there, kneeling on the gravel, a broken man in the ruins of the kingdom he had failed to protect. When I walked out of the Sterling villa for the last time, the sun was shining with a brilliance I hadn't noticed in years. The air was clean, carrying the faint, sweet scent of freshly cut grass from a neighboring yard. I took a deep, lung-filling breath. The air of freedom tasted sweeter than any victory. The silence in my new apartment was a living thing, and I cherished it. There were no whispered arguments, no calculating footsteps in the hall, no oppressive weight of someone else's expectations. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, my time and my space were entirely my own. Alistair never contacted me again. I think my finality, coupled with the utter ruin I had laid bare, had finally severed whatever delusional thread still connected him to me. He was likely spinning like a top, trying to salvage what was left of Sterling Enterprises. The scandal had caused a massive shareholder revolt, and their stock value was a fraction of what it once was. Through the gossiping channels that inevitably reach even those who wish to avoid them, I heard snippets. Eleanor had suffered a complete emotional collapse and had been quietly checked into a private sanatorium upstate. The stress and humiliation had been too much for her meticulously constructed world. Harold's hair had turned white almost overnight. The board of directors had forcibly retired him, a mercy killing for a career already on life support. The once glorious, unshakable Sterling dynasty had crumbled into dust, and none of it had anything to do with me anymore. I was a spectator to their downfall, and the view was serene. Using the more than generous divorce settlement, which I had accepted not out of need, but as a form of poetic justice, I did what I had always dreamed of in my first life. I leased a bright, airy loft in a trendy part of the city and opened my own design studio. Ethel Design, I named it from the Old English word for noble. It was my reclamation. I surrounded myself with fabrics, sketches, and a small, talented team who saw me for my vision, not my past. We specialized in sustainable, transformative interiors, creating beautiful, functional spaces out of chaos. The irony was not lost on me. I was building a career, a life, out of the very thing I had just accomplished in my personal world. Weeks turned into months. The scandal faded from the front pages, replaced by newer, fresher gossip. I found a rhythm, a contentment I had never known was possible. I traveled on a whim, ate what I wanted, and worked late into the night simply for the joy of it. The ghost of my past life grew fainter, its hold on me weakening with every passing day of peace. One Tuesday morning, my assistant, a sharp and efficient young woman named Maya, buzzed my intercom. "Elara, there's a gentleman here to see you. A Mr. Thorne. He doesn't have an appointment, but he insists you'll know him." Thorne. The name sent a jolt through my system, a tremor of a feeling I had long buried. It couldn't be. Send him in, Maya, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The door to my office opened and a man stepped inside. He was familiar yet profoundly changed. The lanky, intense art student I had known was gone, replaced by a man in an exquisitely tailored charcoal suit, his posture straight and assured. But his eyes were the same. A deep, warm brown, and they held a gentleness that felt like a memory of a sunnier time. It was Julian Thorne. He stood there for a moment just looking at me, a soft smile playing on his lips. Then he stepped forward. "Elara," he said, and my name in his voice was a key turning in a lock I thought was sealed forever. Long time no see. Julian had been my senior in art school. He was the one who got away, the man I had loved in secret, too intimidated by his fierce talent and quiet intensity to ever confess my feelings. He saw a creativity in me that Alistair had always dismissed as a hobby. After graduation, Julian had left for a prestigious apprenticeship in Milan, and we had lost touch. My life with Alistair had begun soon after. What are you doing here?" I asked, my professional composure momentarily shattered. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in that way I remembered. "I came back to find the moon I missed all those years ago." His gaze was so warm, so sincere, it stole the air from my lungs. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Then, to my utter astonishment, he went down on one knee right there on the polished concrete floor of my studio. He took a small black velvet box from his inner jacket pocket. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic wild bird. "In my previous life," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that mirrored the chaos in my own soul, "I came back too late. I heard you had married that sterling heir. I thought I had lost my chance forever." He opened the box. Nestled inside was a ring, not a cold, perfect diamond, but a unique, fiery opal surrounded by delicate leaves of hammered gold. It was art. It was me. He looked up, his eyes holding mine, and I saw it then. A knowledge, a shared weight, a understanding that went beyond the years we had spent apart. It turned out I wasn't the only one reborn. "This time," Julian whispered, his voice full of a hope that felt like a sunrise, "I won't let go. Lara, will you give me a chance? A chance to take care of you for the rest of your life." Tears, not of sorrow but of a profound, healing joy, pricked the corners of my eyes. I looked into the stars held within his gaze, at the man who had seen the artist in me before I saw her myself in both my lives. I didn't need to think. I didn't need to hesitate. I smiled, a true, unburdened smile that felt like my first, and nodded. Yes. The sunset poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my studio, bathing us both in a radiant golden glow. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, warmth and a silent, breathtaking beauty wrapped around us. The ashes of my old life had cooled, and from them, something new and beautiful was finally beginning to grow. My new life, our new life, had truly just begun. The world looked different with Julian's ring on my finger. It was as if a filter had been lifted, revealing colors more vibrant and details I had been too burdened to see. We didn't rush. We had, it seemed, all the time in the world. Our courtship was a quiet, deliberate discovery of the people we had become and the echoes of the people we might have been. We spent long evenings in my apartment talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his work in Italy, the master craftsman he had learned from, the way the light fell on the Duomo at dusk. I told him about Ethel design, about the joy of building something from my own mind and my own hands. I did not speak of the sterlings. He never asked. He seemed to understand that that chapter was a closed book, its pages ash. Sometimes, in the way he would look at me, a look that held a deep, aching recognition, I was sure of it. He remembered. He remembered a life where he had returned to find me already trapped in a gilded cage, a life where he had watched from a distance as the light in me slowly dimmed. This knowledge sat between us not as a sorrow, but as a sacred shared secret that made our second chance all the more precious. We were married in a small, sun-drenched ceremony in a botanical garden. There were no sterlings on the guest list, no society reporters. There was only family, a few true friends, and my design team. I wore a simple, elegant dress of my own design, the color of champagne, and Julian's opal ring was the only jewel I needed. When he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his eyes promising a lifetime of mornings and a lifetime of believing in me. Our life together was a masterpiece of quiet happiness. We merged our studios, creating Thorn and Ethel, a firm that quickly became renowned for its soulful integrated designs. We traveled the world not as escape but as inspiration, filling our home with treasures we found together. A piece of driftwood from a Balinese shore, a vibrant textile from a Moroccan souk, a sketch from a street artist in Paris. About a year after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Unlike the fear and manipulation that had shadowed my first pregnancy, this one was met with pure, unadulterated joy. Julian would talk to my growing belly, telling our child stories about the world, about art, about how very much they were already loved. Isabella was born on a bright spring morning, her cry a strong, healthy sound that echoed in a delivery room filled with light and love. She had my eyes and Julian's serene smile. Holding her, smelling her sweet, milky scent, I felt the last vestiges of my old, painful life dissolve. This was the child I was meant to have. This was the family I was meant to build. We were in a park one afternoon, Isabella now a toddling, curious 2-year-old chasing butterflies when I saw him. Alistair was sitting on a bench some distance away. He was alone. He looked older, his shoulders slumped, his clothes hanging on a frame that had grown thin. He was watching a family of ducks on the pond, but his gaze was empty. The once powerful Sio was now just a man, stripped of his empire, his illusions, and the people who had enabled him. He hadn't seen us. I felt no hatred, no bitterness. Looking at him was like looking at a relic from a museum of a civilization long gone. He was a part of a history that no longer had any power over me. Julian followed my gaze. He didn't say anything, but his hand found mine, his grip warm and solid. He squeezed gently, a silent message of understanding and possession. He then scooped up a giggling Isabella who was demanding, "Uppy, Papa," and settled her on his shoulders. "Ready to go home, my loves?" he asked, his eyes on me. I took one last fleeting look at the man on the bench. Then I turned back to my husband and my daughter, to the life we had built from hope and second chances. "Yes," I said, smiling up at Isabella who was trying to catch the sun through her tiny fingers. "Let's go home." We walked away, the three of us, our shadows blending together into one long happy shape on the path. The past was a closed door behind me. My future, bright and boundless, stretched out ahead, a beautiful blank canvas waiting for the next joyful stroke. The end.